Rumor has a way of walking through a police station faster than any officer ever could, but on that gray Monday morning, one sentence seemed to stop every conversation in its tracks. The biggest mistake you'll ever make is judging someone before you know who they are. No one knew who had said it first. Some claimed it came from a retiring lieutenant. Others swore it had been written inside an old locker decades ago. Whatever its origin, almost no one paid attention to it anymore. Inside the Richmond Police Department, coffee steamed from paper cups, radios crackled with routine calls, and polished boots echoed across spotless tile floors as officers prepared for another ordinary shift. Yet beneath the familiar rhythm floated an unusual tension. A new police captain was scheduled to take command before noon. No photograph had been released. No official biography had been shared. The department commissioner had insisted on complete confidentiality until the formal introduction, explaining only that the new leader had earned an exceptional reputation for integrity, accountability, and rebuilding fractured divisions. That mystery quickly became entertainment for officers gathered around the morning briefing room. Guesses turned into jokes, jokes turned into wagers, and before long everyone seemed convinced the incoming captain would fit the same image they had carried in their minds for years. Officer Daniel Walker leaned comfortably against the evidence counter with the confidence of someone who believed he understood exactly how the department worked. He wore his badge proudly and smiled whenever another officer laughed at one of his sarcastic remarks. "Whoever they send," he said with a shrug, "they'll learn pretty fast who's really keeping this place running." Several officers chuckled while others exchanged uneasy looks, choosing silence over disagreement. At exactly 8:17 a.m., the front doors opened quietly. A woman stepped inside wearing a simple navy blazer, carrying a worn leather portfolio instead of a briefcase. Her natural curls framed a calm face untouched by the nervousness many visitors showed when entering a police station. She paused for only a moment, studying the lobby with patient eyes that noticed everything without appearing to stare at anyone. Her name was Naomi Brooks, though no one around her recognized it yet. She approached the reception desk with a polite smile and asked if someone could direct her to the commissioner's office. Before the receptionist could answer, Daniel glanced toward her from across the room. His expression shifted almost instantly from casual curiosity to quiet suspicion. Without asking a single question, he convinced himself that she did not belong there. He watched her every movement, searching for a reason to intervene. Around him, conversations slowly faded as more officers noticed the unfamiliar visitor standing alone beneath the department seal mounted high on the wall. Naomi remained composed, unaware that nearly every pair of eyes had settled on her. Or perhaps she was aware and simply refused to let it change the steady confidence in her posture. Somewhere beyond the secured hallway, an elevator door opened. Outside, a black government SUV rolled silently into the parking lot. Inside the station, the invisible countdown toward a life-changing revelation had already begun. Even though the one man preparing to make the worst decision of his career still believed he was completely in control. Naomi thanked the receptionist with the same quiet courtesy she had offered the moment she entered. But before the receptionist could answer, Daniel stepped forward with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, folding his arms as though he already knew the answer. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. "I have an appointment with the police commissioner this morning." Daniel glanced at the simple portfolio in her hand and then back at her face, measuring her against assumptions he had formed within seconds. "Do you have identification?" he asked. Naomi nodded calmly. "I do." She reached toward her portfolio, but Daniel raised a hand before she could open it. "Actually, wait right there." His voice carried across the lobby, drawing attention from officers who had quietly returned to their conversations. One by one they stopped again, sensing that something interesting was unfolding. Daniel walked behind the reception counter, exchanged a few whispered words with another officer, then returned with an expression that suggested he had already made up his mind. "We have had several unauthorized visitors recently," he explained loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Standard procedure." Naomi simply nodded. "I understand." Her answer seemed to disappoint him. He had expected frustration, perhaps even an argument. Instead, she stood with remarkable patience, her posture relaxed, her expression impossible to read. Around them, officers exchanged curious glances. Some watched openly while others pretended to organize paperwork without taking their eyes off the scene. Daniel circled slowly, studying the portfolio she carried. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. Naomi handed it to him without resistance. He opened it carefully, flipping through neatly organized folders, legal pads, and sealed envelopes. Nothing appeared unusual. Yet instead of ending the inspection, Daniel quietly slipped one small evidence envelope from the counter beside him beneath the stack of papers before closing the portfolio again. The movement lasted barely a second, hidden behind the folder cover and unnoticed by nearly everyone in the room. Almost unnoticed. A young dispatcher standing near the communications desk frowned slightly, uncertain whether she had really seen what she thought she saw. Daniel placed the portfolio back into Naomi's hands and took a slow step backward. "Interesting," he said. "Would you mind opening it again?" Naomi looked directly at him. Of course. She unlatched the portfolio, revealing the contents exactly as he had left them. Daniel reached inside himself and lifted the sealed evidence envelope between two fingers. Gasps rippled softly through the lobby. "Well," he announced, "this definitely should not be here." Several officers moved closer. Others exchanged uneasy looks without speaking. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly to the envelope before looking back at Daniel. There was no panic, no raised voice, no desperate explanation. She simply asked, "Are you certain that is where it belongs?" The question caught him off guard for only an instant before confidence returned to his face. "That is department evidence," he replied firmly. "It does not leave secured storage unless authorized." Naomi gave a slow nod, almost as if she were making a quiet mental note rather than defending herself. Above the lobby entrance, the security cameras continued recording every expression, every movement, and every word. Outside, the black government SUV came to a gentle stop beneath the American flag. While inside the station, no one noticed the elevator indicator silently descending toward the first floor. The silence inside the lobby grew heavier than anyone expected. The evidence envelope rested in Daniel Walker's hand as though it answered every question before they could even be asked. A few officers exchanged satisfied smiles, convinced they had just witnessed an open and shut case. Others shifted uneasily, sensing that something about the moment did not feel right. Naomi Brooks remained exactly where she stood, her shoulders relaxed and her breathing steady. She neither protested nor pleaded. Instead, she looked directly at Daniel with a calm expression that seemed strangely out of place for someone facing such a public accusation. "May I ask you one question, officer?" she said in a voice so composed that several people instinctively leaned closer to hear. Daniel nodded with quiet confidence. "Go ahead." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Before you found that envelope, did you ever lose sight of my portfolio?" Daniel answered immediately. "No." His response came too quickly, almost rehearsed. Naomi simply acknowledged the answer with a small nod. "Thank you." That was all she said. No explanation, no complaint, no attempt to defend herself. Her restraint puzzled the young dispatcher who had watched Daniel move around the reception counter only moments earlier. She replayed the scene again and again in her mind, trying to decide whether her eyes had deceived her. Nearby, Sergeant Michael Harris quietly observed the growing crowd from the hallway. A veteran with nearly 25 years on the force, he had learned that the loudest voices were not always the most trustworthy. He noticed the unusual calm in Naomi's posture and compared it with Daniel's increasing eagerness to control every conversation. Something felt backwards. Daniel lifted the envelope slightly higher so everyone could see it. "Evidence belongs in secured storage," he announced. Finding it inside a visitor's portfolio raises serious concerns. A few officers murmured in agreement. One patrol officer even reached for his radio before hesitating, waiting for further instruction. Naomi never took her eyes off Daniel. She quietly looked toward the security cameras mounted above the reception area before allowing her gaze to drift across the lobby. She noticed every face, every reaction, every person who laughed, every person who looked away, every person who seemed uncomfortable but remained silent. Years of leadership had taught her that moments like these revealed far more about an organization than any performance review ever could. Outside the station, the black government SUV remained parked with its engine now switched off. Two professionally dressed officials stepped onto the sidewalk without rushing. They exchanged a few quiet words before walking toward the entrance with measured confidence. Inside, no one noticed them yet. Daniel seemed almost energized by the attention surrounding him. "Until we sort this out," he said firmly, "I am going to need you to stay exactly where you are." Naomi answered with the same remarkable composure she had maintained since arriving. "I have no intention of leaving." Her reply carried neither fear nor defiance. It sounded more like certainty. That single sentence lingered in the room long after she finished speaking. Even those who doubted her found themselves wondering why someone under suspicion appeared more at peace than the officer making the accusation. Then, just as another uneasy silence settled over the lobby, the front doors opened once again. The quiet sound echoed through the station, and nearly every head turned toward the entrance, unaware that the next few minutes would permanently change careers, reputations, and the future of the entire department. The two officials who entered the station carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who never needed to announce their authority. Their tailored suits and polished shoes stood out against the sea of uniforms, yet neither of them hurried. They paused briefly at the reception desk, exchanged a few calm words with the receptionist, and glanced toward the growing crowd gathered in the center of the lobby. Daniel Walker noticed them immediately but barely gave them a second thought. His attention remained fixed on Naomi Brooks, convinced he had already established control of the situation. "You arrived on an interesting morning," he remarked with a satisfied smile. "Unfortunately, department policy requires us to resolve this matter before anyone goes upstairs." Naomi answered with the same measured tone she had used from the beginning. "I appreciate your commitment to procedure." Her response seemed almost unexpected, leaving Daniel with nothing to argue against. The officials quietly observed without interrupting. One of them, a gray-haired man carrying a slim leather folder, looked briefly toward the ceiling-mounted security cameras before making a discreet note. Sergeant Michael Harris noticed the gesture and felt the uneasy weight in his stomach grow heavier. Years of experience had taught him that observers rarely took notes unless they expected those notes to matter later. Around the lobby, conversations had completely stopped. Dispatchers glanced through office windows. Detectives emerging from the hallway slowed their pace. Even civilian employees lingered near their desks, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Daniel lifted the evidence envelope once more. "For everyone's benefit," he announced, this envelope was discovered inside her personal portfolio during a routine inspection. Naomi looked toward him with calm curiosity. "Would you mind explaining which part of the inspection required you to handle my belongings before allowing me to identify myself?" The question landed softly, but its effect spread through the room like a ripple across still water. Daniel hesitated for barely a heartbeat before replying. "Officer safety and department security." Naomi nodded thoughtfully. "I understand." Again she offered no argument, no accusation, no emotional reaction. Her patience unsettled more people than anger ever could have. The young dispatcher quietly glanced toward Sergeant Harris, hoping someone with more authority would step in. Harris remained silent, still watching every detail unfold. The gray-haired official slowly closed his folder and looked at his colleague. Neither spoke. Their silence suggested they were waiting for something very specific. Daniel, encouraged by the attention surrounding him, continued speaking. "We cannot allow exceptions simply because someone claims to have an appointment." Naomi answered almost gently. "I completely agree. Standards should apply equally to everyone." Several officers exchanged puzzled looks. They expected resistance, yet every answer she gave reinforced the very principles Daniel claimed to defend. The difference was that her words carried quiet conviction instead of pride. Then Naomi lifted her eyes toward the department seal mounted above the reception desk. Beneath it hung a bronze plaque engraved with the department's guiding words: integrity, service, accountability. She read each word slowly before returning her attention to the room. "Those are meaningful promises," she said softly. "They deserve to be protected every single day." The gray-haired official finally took one deliberate step forward, his polished shoes echoing across the silent lobby. At almost the same moment, the elevator doors at the far end of the hallway opened with a gentle chime. Every conversation disappeared. Every eye shifted toward the hallway. Even Daniel lowered the evidence envelope slightly, unaware that the carefully constructed story he believed everyone accepted was only seconds away from colliding with a truth that had already been walking toward him since the moment Naomi entered the building. The elevator doors slid open with quiet precision, and Police Commissioner Robert Ellison stepped into the lobby surrounded by two senior officials from Internal Affairs. Their arrival changed the atmosphere instantly, though not in the way most people expected. Officers straightened their uniforms. Conversations disappeared. Even the ringing telephones seemed less important as every eye followed the commissioner walking calmly across the polished floor. Daniel Walker quickly placed the evidence envelope on the reception counter and stood a little taller, convinced he had demonstrated exactly the kind of vigilance department leadership wanted to see. Commissioner Ellison acknowledged several officers with a polite nod before his attention settled on the scene unfolding in the center of the lobby. His expression remained unreadable. "Good morning," he said evenly. "It appears something has delayed our schedule." Daniel stepped forward confidently. "Commissioner, we intercepted a visitor attempting to enter the building with secured evidence inside her portfolio. We are following department protocol." Ellison looked briefly toward the envelope before turning his eyes to Naomi Brooks. She stood exactly where she had been from the beginning, composed and patient, showing neither frustration nor relief at the commissioner's arrival. For a brief moment, the commissioner simply studied her expression. Then he asked a question that surprised everyone. "Has anyone reviewed the security footage?" The lobby became perfectly still. Daniel answered quickly, "That will not be necessary. The evidence was discovered during inspection." The commissioner remained silent for several seconds before looking toward the gray-haired Internal Affairs official standing beside him. The official opened his leather folder and quietly removed a tablet computer. Without speaking, he tapped the screen a few times before glancing toward the security cameras mounted above the reception desk. Sergeant Michael Harris noticed the exchange immediately. His instincts told him the situation had already moved beyond a simple misunderstanding. Naomi continued observing every reaction around her. She noticed the dispatcher who still looked uncertain. She noticed the officers who suddenly avoided eye contact. She noticed Daniel beginning to shift his weight ever so slightly, as though confidence had started giving way to impatience. Yet she still said nothing. The commissioner slowly walked beneath the department motto displayed on the wall: integrity, service, accountability. He rested his hands behind his back and addressed the room instead of any single individual. The character of an organization is not measured when everything goes according to plan. It is measured when people believe no one important is watching. Several officers lowered their eyes. Daniel forced a polite smile. "Commissioner, we simply acted to protect department property." Ellison nodded once. "That is exactly why every detail matters." At that moment, one of the Internal Affairs officials quietly received a message through an earpiece. He leaned toward the commissioner and whispered only a few words. The commissioner gave a small nod before looking directly at Naomi for the first time since entering the lobby. Their eyes met for barely a second, yet something passed silently between them that no one else seemed to understand. Daniel noticed the brief exchange but dismissed it as coincidence. He still believed the morning belonged to him. What he did not know was that the security recordings from every camera in the lobby had already been preserved, the timestamps verified, and every movement from the moment Naomi entered the station was now waiting to be reviewed. Without realizing it, he had spent the last several minutes building the strongest case against the one person he believed he had already defeated, while the real story had quietly begun writing itself from the very first second the station doors had opened. Commissioner Robert Ellison slowly stepped away from the reception desk and looked across the crowded lobby, with the calm confidence of a leader who already knew far more than anyone else in the room. No one spoke. Even the officers who had quietly supported Daniel Walker only moments earlier now waited for the commissioner to decide what would happen next. The gray-haired internal affairs official held the tablet at his side without opening it again. It was almost as if the answers were already there, waiting for the proper moment. Ellison glanced toward the large clock hanging above the lobby entrance before speaking. 8:30 sharp, he said quietly. Right on schedule. Daniel looked confused by the remark but quickly recovered. Commissioner, I understand everyone is eager for this morning's meeting, but I believed it would be irresponsible to ignore what we discovered. Ellison gave a polite nod. Responsibility is important, Officer Walker. So is patience. He then turned toward Naomi Brooks. For the first time since entering the station, his expression softened into genuine respect. Thank you for arriving early. The simple sentence echoed through the silent lobby. Several officers exchanged puzzled looks. Daniel frowned slightly, unsure why the commissioner would thank someone still standing under suspicion. Naomi answered with a small smile. I thought it would be valuable to see the department before introductions began. Ellison nodded again. And did you? Naomi paused only briefly before replying. I learned a great deal in less than 15 minutes. Those words landed with unexpected weight. Sergeant Michael Harris slowly folded his arms, realizing the conversation carried a meaning that most people had not yet recognized. The commissioner turned back toward the assembled officers. Many of you have spent the last several weeks asking who would become your next captain. You wondered about experience, leadership style, and expectations. Some of you guessed. Some of you worried. A few of you were absolutely certain you already understood the kind of person who would walk through these doors today. Daniel looked toward the commissioner with growing uncertainty. The confidence that had carried him throughout the morning began to fade, replaced by questions he could not answer. Ellison continued walking until he stood directly beside Naomi. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch long enough for every officer in the room to focus completely on him. Leadership, he said, is revealed long before a ceremony begins. Sometimes the first test happens before anyone realizes the examination has already started. The internal affairs officials quietly stepped to either side of the commissioner. The gray-haired official finally opened his leather folder and removed a neatly printed appointment document bearing the department seal. He handed it to Ellison without saying a word. Daniel stared at the document, then at Naomi, then back at the commissioner as though trying to solve a puzzle that suddenly no longer made sense. Naomi remained composed, offering neither satisfaction nor judgment. She simply waited. Commissioner Ellison looked around the lobby one final time before speaking with unmistakable clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to welcome the newest commanding officer of the Richmond Police Department. He turned toward Naomi with a respectful smile. Police Captain Naomi Brooks. For one breathtaking moment the station seemed to forget how to breathe. No radios interrupted the silence. No phones rang loudly enough to break it. Every officer stood motionless as the realization spread from one face to another. Daniel felt the color drain from his face as his eyes slowly shifted from the appointment document to the evidence envelope still resting on the reception counter. And for the first time that morning he understood that the story he believed he had been writing had never belonged to him at all. No one moved. The silence hanging over the lobby carried more weight than any command ever could. Officer Daniel Walker stood frozen beside the reception counter, his eyes fixed on the appointment document in Commissioner Robert Ellison's hand before slowly drifting toward Naomi Brooks. Only minutes earlier he had spoken to her as though she were someone who needed permission to stand inside the building. Now every assumption he had made seemed to collapse under the quiet reality standing only a few feet away. Naomi accepted the commissioner's handshake with calm professionalism before turning to face the officers gathered around her. There was no triumphant smile. No look of satisfaction. She simply acknowledged the room with the same steady composure she had displayed since the moment she arrived. Commissioner Ellison allowed the silence to linger for another moment before speaking again. Captain Brooks requested that her arrival remain confidential. She wanted her first impression of this department to be genuine, not rehearsed. No special escort. No advance introductions. No ceremony before observation. A wave of uneasy realization spread across the lobby. Officers who had laughed earlier now lowered their eyes. Others quietly replayed every word they had spoken since the beginning of the morning. Sergeant Michael Harris slowly released a long breath. The pieces finally fit together. This had never been an ordinary arrival. It had been an opportunity for the department to reveal its own character. The gray-haired internal affairs official stepped forward holding the tablet that had remained untouched for several minutes. Captain Brooks also requested that the security recordings remain uninterrupted from the moment she entered the station. He explained calmly. Every camera in this lobby has been recording continuously. Every timestamp has been verified. Every interaction has been preserved exactly as it occurred. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. His confident posture disappeared as memory rushed back with uncomfortable clarity. He remembered stepping behind the reception counter. He remembered placing the evidence envelope where he believed no one would notice. At the time, it had seemed like a clever shortcut to prove a point he had already convinced himself was true. Now he realized that every movement had unfolded beneath multiple security cameras positioned from different angles. The young dispatcher looked toward the internal affairs official with visible relief. She had questioned her own memory only moments earlier. Now she understood that she had not imagined what she saw. Commissioner Ellison turned toward Daniel, his voice remaining calm and measured. Officer Walker, before we continue, is there anything you would like to clarify regarding your interaction with Captain Brooks? Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in years, he found himself without an explanation that sounded believable, even to himself. Naomi finally spoke, her voice carrying neither anger nor accusation. Truth does not become stronger when people argue about it. It simply waits until everyone is ready to see it. Her words settled over the room with quiet dignity. No one interrupted her. No one looked away. In that moment, many officers realized the lesson unfolding before them had very little to do with rank and everything to do with integrity. Commissioner Ellison nodded once toward the internal affairs team. The gray-haired official touched the tablet screen, preparing to display the lobby footage for everyone present. As the first security camera image appeared, the room watched in complete silence, knowing that within seconds assumptions would give way to facts, opinions would surrender to evidence, and the morning that had begun with whispered confidence would continue with undeniable truth. The first video began playing without sound. Every eye in the lobby remained fixed on the large monitor as the security footage captured Naomi Brooks entering the station exactly as everyone remembered. She walked through the front doors carrying nothing more than her leather portfolio, paused briefly to observe the lobby, and approached the reception desk with calm professionalism. The timestamp in the corner confirmed every second. The internal affairs official advanced the recording slowly. Daniel Walker appeared on screen approaching Naomi with measured confidence. His conversation unfolded exactly as it had only minutes earlier, but watching it from above revealed details no one standing in the lobby had fully noticed. The camera nearest the reception counter showed Daniel stepping behind the desk while Naomi remained several feet away speaking politely with the receptionist. A second camera from the opposite corner captured his right hand, reaching toward the secured counter, where the evidence envelope had been resting before he casually slipped it beneath a stack of folders moments before returning the portfolio to Naomi. The room became perfectly silent. There was no room for interpretation. Every movement appeared from multiple angles with matching timestamps. The young dispatcher quietly lowered her head, relieved that her memory had been correct. Sergeant Michael Harris closed his eyes for a brief moment before opening them again, disappointment replacing uncertainty. Commissioner Robert Ellison watched without interrupting until the final frame stopped on Daniel removing the same envelope from Naomi's portfolio while announcing its discovery. The commissioner looked around the room before speaking. Facts do not raise their voices. They simply remain where they have always been. No one argued. No one questioned the recording. Daniel stared at the frozen image on the monitor as though seeing it for the first time himself. The confidence that had shaped every decision he made that morning had disappeared completely. Internal Affairs quietly documented the evidence while another official collected the envelope using standard chain of custody procedures. Everything happened calmly, professionally, and without unnecessary spectacle. Naomi remained exactly where she stood, saying nothing until Commissioner Ellison turned toward her. "Captain Brooks, would you like to address the department?" She paused thoughtfully before answering. "Not yet." Her response surprised nearly everyone. She continued in the same calm voice. "Today is not about embarrassment. It is about accountability. Every organization faces moments that reveal its culture. What matters is whether people choose to learn from those moments." Several officers slowly nodded. Others appeared deeply reflective, replaying their own silence during the morning's events. Naomi looked across the lobby, meeting the eyes of officers who had watched without speaking, those who had quietly questioned what they were seeing, and those who had accepted appearances without asking a single question. "Integrity begins long before someone important enters the room," she said. "It begins when you believe nobody will ever review your choices." Her words settled over the department with quiet force. Commissioner Ellison then informed Daniel that Internal Affairs would conduct a formal administrative review based on the documented evidence and department policy. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, and no celebration. The consequences would follow established procedures, exactly as every officer had sworn to uphold. As the monitor faded to black, the lobby felt different from the place it had been less than an hour earlier. The building itself had not changed, but the people inside understood that one ordinary morning had exposed far more than a single mistake. It had revealed how easily assumptions could replace fairness, and how power meant very little when measured against the simple, undeniable weight of the truth. The formal meeting began only after the lobby had returned to a quiet, thoughtful calm. Officers filled the briefing room with very different expressions from the ones they had worn less than an hour earlier. The laughter was gone. The whispered assumptions had disappeared. In their place stood reflection, humility, and an understanding that every badge represented far more than authority. Commissioner Robert Ellison welcomed Captain Naomi Brooks to the front of the room, where the department flag stood beside the American flag beneath the words that had guided generations of officers. Integrity, service, accountability. Naomi looked across the room without rushing to speak. She recognized faces that had remained silent, faces that had quietly questioned what they witnessed, and faces that now carried sincere regret. When she finally spoke, her voice remained calm, measured, and impossible to ignore. "This morning was never designed to test who knew my title," she began. "It was designed to reveal how people treat someone when they believe that person has no power." The room remained silent. Every citizen who walks through these doors deserves professionalism, fairness, and respect. They should not have to earn dignity because dignity is not a reward. It is a right. Several officers slowly nodded, including Sergeant Michael Harris, who understood those words better than anyone after nearly a quarter-century of service. Naomi continued, "Some people believe leadership begins after a promotion. I believe leadership begins with every decision that nobody else notices. Character is revealed long before recognition arrives." Her eyes briefly met Daniel Walker's. He remained seated quietly, no longer trying to defend himself or explain away the choices that had brought him to this moment. The formal review process would continue according to department policy, and its outcome would follow established procedures. Naomi did not ask for harsher consequences. She did not seek personal satisfaction. She trusted the same system she expected every officer to honor. That decision left an even deeper impression on the department than any emotional speech could have delivered. Commissioner Ellison closed the meeting with a simple reminder. Public trust is earned one decision at a time. We either strengthen it every day, or we slowly lose it. As officers quietly returned to their assignments, the atmosphere throughout the station felt unmistakably different. Conversations became more thoughtful. Greetings became more genuine. The young dispatcher smiled as Captain Brooks thanked her for remaining attentive, even when uncertainty filled the room. Sergeant Harris welcomed his new commanding officer with quiet respect, believing the department had been given a rare opportunity to become stronger rather than simply move on. Before entering her new office, Naomi paused beneath the department seal one last time. Morning sunlight streamed through the front windows, illuminating the bronze plaque on the wall. She rested her hand lightly against the edge of the podium before speaking softly, almost as if the building itself needed to hear the words. A badge does not make someone honorable. It gives them the opportunity to prove they already are. Then she opened the office door and stepped forward into her first day as police captain, carrying neither bitterness nor pride, only the determination to build a department where fairness would never depend on appearance, where every voice would receive the same respect, and where the truth would never need to fight to be heard. Because uniforms can command attention, titles can command authority, and power can command obedience, but only integrity can command lasting respect. And on that ordinary Monday morning, everyone inside the Richmond Police Department discovered that the strongest form of justice does not arrive with anger. It arrives quietly, waits patiently, and stands unshaken until the truth finally has a face.